Hello, we're going to talk about Arsenal and some tactics, specifically Mikel Arteta's tactics and the sort of weirder ones that don't fully make sense some of the time. We're going to look at why that is, starting with one we've noticed of late called, we're going to call it the donut, because it's sort of like a ring formation you see, and it produces something called the horseshoe-matrix, which is not exciting or a film, so don't get your hopes up. Here with this, right, this was a 4-2-3-1 that Arsenal played against Fulham. Fulham played in the Premier League, as you may be aware. So when they played against them, Fulham played in a 4-4-2 block, and it was pretty obvious they were going to do this because this is what Scott Parker had done previously. So what I think Arteta's doing, and perhaps an example of when he might be overthinking it a little bit, is that the space in this game is going to be out wide of the block, right? So the space is going to be mostly in these areas, either side. I won't draw both of them. So what you want to do is, what Arteta wanted to do, was get more players there to create an overload in the space, because between the lines of the 4-4-2, it's very narrow, very squashed. There's just no real room to play. So if you have someone like Emil Smith-Rowe, who is playing as a number 10 in this game, not an awful lot of room. If he gets the ball here, he's got to be really sharp to pass that way again. If he takes it to feet, he's got to turn really quick. It's quite difficult. Most of your space is going to be out wide. Now, by having Smith-Rowe move out to the left or the right as a 10, what you end up getting is a 3v2 on this wing here, or a 2v2 in the right, but you see Smith-Rowe can over here and create a 3v2, and that's what we're going to have. And then you've got an overload, obviously, who's going to help getting the ball in. Now, Elneny sits at the base of the whole thing. This example is Thomas Partey's done it in other games when he's used the donut. And so what happens here is the ball goes out to Saka, one of Elneny's best friends on the right wing. The ball goes in, but look who's in the middle. Oh yes, it's only really Lacazette who's there to attack it as the 9. Martinelli can come in off the left to attack this, and this would kind of be fine, but it squashes all your width, so suddenly you lose all this width here, and you need that to stretch the defence apart. It might have worked as if you had Kieran Tierney fit, because Tierney can overlap. Or you could have played Saka at the left back, so you'd get attacking width that way. But he's going with Saka because of various injury reasons, and you end up with this congested, weird donut shape, where the ball just gets passed around, and it never ever goes in the goal. It just goes up, back, and yeah, it's not great. So Ceballos is one of the two central midfielders. I wouldn't call him a pivot as such, because nothing was really going around him. He was just hovering about doing Ceballos things, which are unclear as to what they really are. And yeah, so he'd end up here, Zach would end up here, and Martinelli out here, something like that, often in the same vertical space. Not ideal, don't really get it. Another thing that sort of confuses me about it is that Lacazette is largely playing a false 9 position. So all the depth from the team, all the central, so you've got your depth here would be your, you might associate this, like you have your striker at the top. So to create your depth, you need to have obviously depth between your deepest player and your furthest forward player. And in some systems you might have like Elneny down here, you see, and Lacazette up here as the striker. But Elneny's sitting at the base with the little triangle with the 2 centre backs, Lacazette's here. But what he keeps doing, or did during this game I should say, is dropping deep to receive the ball. So it ends up you just have no one around, and that horseshoe matrix becomes even more matrixy, and the ball never goes in. Now what I think Arteta's trying to do, and we'll see this in a couple other setups, is by playing the false 9, is that your danger zone in football really is kind of around here. It's within the width of the 6-yard box, really the 18-yard, or the goal I should say is the most dangerous part. But this is your danger area. So what you want to do is get the ball in here, because that's the most valuable place to shoot from. You're going to score more goals there. Your XG is highest in the danger zone. And that's what Kenny Loggins wrote about all those years ago when he wrote Danger Zone. So what happens, and we'll see this again in a bit, right, is that, so Saka, so let's move Fulham back a little bit, so they're defending. Now the block moves back, obviously, because that's what they do. And then you get Saka coming up here maybe, and we'll have Smith-Rowe floating about as a 10 around about here. Bayern's giving your width, Lacazette might be here, Martinelli might be around about here, Ceballos does whatever Ceballos does. Now if Lacazette is playing as a straight number 9, like a goal poacher or something, right, in the box, Obviously the space is slightly congested because you're defending with so many people in the box. It's harder to get on the end of crosses. He's not a big, huge lad. He's not going to get with a header or something like that. Also, defenders can get touch tight to him. So in order to score, he's got to have amazing movement, get in amongst it, like the front post or the back post, something like that, to be able to score. And Arteta is thinking non-traditionally, outside of the box. Okay, so say Martinelli now has the ball here, in this space here. You know, he's going to pass it back. And what defenders want to do is kind of come out towards him to stop this ball coming across the 6-yard box. That's the danger area. So Lacazette being slightly withdrawn, it means that defenders aren't tight to him, don't know where he is. He can arrive in space and finish off one of these kind of Pro Evo 4 cutbacks that Man City are really good at. And that's probably where Arteta's started working on it with Pep Guardiola. So that's the idea, but it kind of goes against what makes players like Lacazette, Aubameyang really good in the box, is they have that predatory movement where they can get ahead of someone. So you can sort of see what he's trying to do with it. It's not always exactly how it works, but this is kind of the thinking. But it ends up with Arsenal having loads and loads and loads and loads of passes, creating few chances and never really getting in at goal to score. And that's the big problem. And that also affects the rest of the pitch, the rest of the team. As if by magic, what we now have is a new board. This is actually what Arteta's first ever team looked like when he took over at Arsenal. And it's odd because you see what he was thinking at the time when he started and how maybe things got a little bit complicated over time. So straight 4-2-3-1, you get Saka as a fullback, obviously a very attacking fullback, so he's basically a winger. So he'd come up here and attack here. Aubameyang you've got as a striker who was very good playing in teams who played in the counter-attack like Borussia Dortmund. He's one of the best strikers in Europe. Arsenal have relied on his goals for a long time. But I think the theory is that he's better coming into the half space from wide areas. So from an out-to-in run, it means that he arrives in the ball and can shoot on his stronger right foot from these sorts of positions. So around about here. So Lacazette is starting he wanted to introduce a high press when he first started. And he played Lacazette there, and that's where he kept hearing him go, Laka, 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 which has never really stopped. But he's a sort of a withdrawn forward almost, so maybe not a false nine, but he would press high and he would sort of drop behind Aubameyang, like we're talking about, this sort of thing where you arrive late. Then you have, in this first setup, Reiss Nelson, who's an out-and-out winger. So first of all, you get your attacking width from these two guys. Saka becomes a winger, very modern thing to do. Kind of thing you see at Man City. We're talking about a lot of similarities between what Guardiola has done there. Nelson's the wide right here. Mesut Ozil, our friend, our lover, our child. He is here to produce through balls and do all the things that an Ozil does. Lots of lovely passes, penetrative passes that can open up chances for people like Aubameyang to get in behind. So say Ozil cuts a bit here, he's able to thread these sorts of balls that Aubameyang can run onto. That's the sort of thing he's looking for. Or also, if Ozil's a bit deeper, he's able to spot the ball that's going to get Reiss Nelson in when Nelson makes a run from his position. All these sorts of things make total sense in attack. Xhaka, centre midfielder, obvious. Lucas Torreira, a ball-winning midfielder, so he's there to win the ball. Maitland-Niles, another similarity with what is happening at Manchester City. Sort of an innovation, not an innovation, but something he's worked on before and is relatively new. A right-back who is basically a central midfielder who moves into midfield to form a 3. So you end up something like this, your 3 here. Then your 2 centre-backs come up to push up because you're playing a high defensive line. And that's largely what the teams sort of look like. Attacking is a 2-3-5, but really a 4-2-3-1 on the team sheet. And it's fine, makes total sense. Didn't really work. And it's probably down to personnel, maybe just a new manager coming in, all the ideas not quite working. This game ended, I think it was, might have been a 1-1 draw with Bournemouth. Pretty sure it was. So not an ideal start. But soon after, there was this thing called the coronavirus that you may have heard of. And when that happened, Arteta had a bit of time to try something new. So this is the team that played against Manchester City, the first game back from lockdown, the first one, after they had that big long break. And so we'd obviously had time to think, which might not be a good thing. So what you see here is Arsenal were basically in a sort of Christmas tree formation, a lovely tree, or just a triangle, I suppose, it doesn't have to be a tree. But you've got a 4-3-2-1. And although Saka and Aubameyang would move into wide positions as a 3 when they're attacking, in defence, it was very much like this. There's a couple of reasons for it. Now, when they're pressing high up the pitch, because we know how City play, the idea was that by having these players in this sort of Christmas tree shape, you're blocking off the direct pass from, say, Laporte into Silva or from Garcia into De Bruyne, because they're largely covering that. But they can also move across to block the pass over here if they want, which then leaves this one free, but you've got someone like Xhaka who can push up to get tight to him. Gundogan can come up here next to Guendouzi, and Willock can come into Silva. So the idea is that you've got players who can go man-to-man largely, and Man City are playing it from the back. But I think it's actually a very defensive thing that he's done here. And what you don't tend to hear from footballers or attackers is that I just didn't know the defender was going to do that, so it cancelled him out. It's generally the attacking players, the creative ones, who catch you by surprise, do something new. Defenders largely kind of want to be in place to stop it. Now, when City attack, they attack with like a WM type thing. So we'll do this, right? In fact, we'll push these all back a little bit. Now, City, they take two wide players, really wide. They have a centre forward there, and this false nine stuff. And Silva and De Bruyne, when Silva was still playing, would come here. So you see what you're getting here is this sort of W or M shape, whatever you want to call it. So you got that there. Now, the way that the midfield is set up, especially with Arsenal, is that you can sort of bring these guys back to look after them. So you've effectively got two here. You've got every single person in this shape is looked after. There's someone to deal with it all the time, even when you've got the overlap from Walker or you've got Mendy coming up here. City do a lot is they score the same sort of goal, and it's remember that Pro Evo 4 cutback I'm talking about earlier, where a player gets to the line. I'll show you it. So Sterling, what often he would do is he'd pass back to someone like Silva, make a run in behind the fullback. The ball would come in, except he'd be offside. He'd do it much better than I've just done. And then what you have is Sterling getting wide of the goal, and he makes that the pass. And it goes to Jesus or something like that, Aguero or something like that, and they score the easy tap in. So this is something that I think Arteta's put in place to sort of play with that. It's a straight midfield three, you could say. But then what you've got is Aubameyang and Saka waiting for a ball out from one of Mustafi or Pablo Mari, and then they can move into the wide areas and attack that way. And I mean, again, not exactly how this works, but the theory seems to be there, and didn't really play out in the game either because they got done 3-0, so not perfect. But it's an example of where I think you've seen something Arteta's put in place to try and combat an attacking strength of his team and make sure that he's defensively solid with this. And a few games later, they played 4-2-3-1 a couple of times, and then they got beaten to Brighton, and everything changed, and he went to the 3-4-3, which, you know, is a 5-4-1 in defence when you want it to be, but it gives him all the kind of things he wanted from the start when he came in. So Saka can play at wing back, a bit of defensive cover from Kieran Tierney, who can play both centre back and left back. And your two centre backs, so you've got your three centre backs here. Obviously, Tierney can overlap if he wants to, doesn't have to. Aubameyang and Pepe, two wingers in the half space. Turtle power, has occurred to me. Aubameyang and Pepe here. Nketiah is a pressing forward who is withdrawn when they actually attack. Ceballos and Xhaka doing all the things that they normally do. And what we noticed most in this 3-4-3 is it was really dull, really boring to watch. Everything was entirely rigid. There was no real freedom of movement. The first 4-2-3-1 that we looked at earlier, the players had set roles really, but they made perfect sense because when they transitioned from that 4-2-3-1 to 3-2-5, they could do so and players in the right places. This sort of made sense as well. You had Aubameyang doing his half space thing, attacking here, and Nketiah alongside him in the high press there. Ceballos and Xhaka in the midfield. This is how they played against Southampton, by the way, which is why they've got the stripy boys here. And Southampton play a 4-4-2 almost always. So a three-man defence made perfect sense to introduce it. And Arsenal were used to it already because Lundberg had used it, Unai Emery had used it, even Arsene Wenger had introduced it. But Arteta's, for a manager we thought was going to be quite exciting and attacking and high pressing and entertaining, I suppose is the word we want to have. It was really rigid. Players have clearly defined roles. 3-4-3 is quite useful because you create these sort of diamonds all over the pitch. So in theory, you've got this lovely these lovely diamonds that you can use, and you've even got one in the middle of the pitch here, I should say. But again, the problem comes from the lack of depth, because Nketiah keeps coming deep to get the ball, and Lacazette would do it, and he would shout Laka, 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 Ale, Laka all of the time. If you listen to any games without the sound, that's what you've heard Arteta shouting. It's to do with where they press and where they go. And if you have the striker further up, then it pushes the opposition defence further back. But because Arteta's version of it has like Aubameyang and Pepe kind of doing that, they don't have to do the same thing, because the danger zone is in the middle of the pitch. So because you don't have that striker there, I mean, he wants him to arrive later, like we've discussed many times, but it doesn't have the same effect, and it has that kind of dulling effect of the Arsenal just passing the ball always around the edge, because Aubameyang would naturally come out wide to try and get the ball, and then Pepe would come out wide to try and get the ball, and then all you've got is just no striker again, and the ball going around forever with nothing really happening in the middle. And this is where you want to get the ball, but they're trying to do it in too clever a way. It might be quite football man analysis, but if you have just a striker in here, you've got Aubameyang, you've got Lacazette, the kind of players who play on the shoulder of the last man who can get into it. You're going to have a lot more fun because the ball's going to be able to come into that. But it has worked in the past, and we saw it in the FA Cup semi-final. So not to totally dismiss this as an idea that works. In the FA Cup semi-final, they played against Manchester City. I know this is Southampton we're on now, but bear with me. So what you had was an attack, and these are different players. We're going to use the same thing for it, because they played in the 3-4-3 for the semi-final win, because they won the FA Cup using the same system. And what happened was you had, I think it was a player out here on wide right, and you had one of the withdrawn forwards attacking, and you had someone else attacking through the middle here. And this is how they scored against the back four. So, because of where Aubameyang's playing, when the ball came out to the right-hand side here, during this Arsenal attack, and Man City, I think they were caught in transition. So the ball from Pepe comes over the top here, and Aubameyang attacks it. But he scores from here, which is kind of nuts. Like, he's obviously really good to be able to have done that. It's quite a hard thing to do. But what they wanted to happen was him to arrive here, and then play the cutback to Xhaka or Nketiah, or not Xhaka, but whoever's here at the time arriving to finish off that move. So it works then, but then you think, if you've got Aubameyang able to make those runs, why are you limiting him to all these wide spaces? You're taking away a lot of his skill set. Gets the goal, so maybe it works. So we've kind of come full circle now with Arteta, where his tactical tinkering, some of them haven't made sense. Maybe he's just trying things out and they haven't worked. Maybe it's the personnel. But he started with a 4-2-3-1 and he's largely gone back to it, but just without the same personnel for a start, but not the same way of playing. So this is how we lined up against Newcastle. It was a 4-2-3-1, and Newcastle kind of played into their tactical hands. So you had Aubameyang as a forward, a straight 9, doing what he does best, which is playing as a striker. You had Martinelli able to come into the half spaces here. You had Willian, being Willian, that's what we'll say about Willian. Martin Odegaard is a number 10 who can float in amongst it whenever he wants to. He knows when to go in behind, he knows when to come short. Elneny and Ceballos, just a bit better here. Bellerin can overlap as a fullback. David Luiz, Gabriel. Granit Xhaka as a left back. And this is the weird part. So this worked against Newcastle to an extent, because Newcastle were defending as this 5-3-2, and the 5-3-2 shows you wide. So you can see that the way the shape of the team just pushes the ball wide to these areas. But he didn't start doing this donut thing where all the players stayed wide. He made sure he had people through the middle, depth, Aubameyang and the centre backs. And it stretches the defence a little bit backwards, and because that then creates a bit of room in between for players like Odegaard to move into. So because Aubameyang will move these guys further back, the theory is that it then opens up space between these players in midfield and defence. Obviously they're going to try and squash in, but then that moves them back even further, which creates even more room for Ceballos and Elneny. That's the kind of theory that this is going to work, and that's sort of how it played out in the game as well. This 5-3-2 didn't do Newcastle any favours whatsoever. But if he'd had, say, what we saw in Arsenal's last game before we filmed this, which was the 3-1 win over West Brom, it was 3-1, you had Bukayo Saka, who obviously started at left back in Arteta's first ever game at left back, and it worked really well. So he comes up here, and straight away that gives you more space for Martinelli to come inside rather than having to stay out wide. It means you've got Aubameyang as your striker in here. You've got Odegaard be able to float around, Willian doing whatever he wants to do here, and the whole thing kind of it just makes sense. You have your 5 here. You've got your 2 if Bayern moves in, but largely here. You've got a box midfield, which works for what Arsenal want to do. And the problem is that Arteta's tried lots of different things. None of them seem to have worked, and the players don't have any consistency to really work with. And you'd think next season he'll have to settle on a set system that he likes to try and have, not necessarily a plan A that you always rely on, but just something that players know, and then get players that fit it and make sure he keeps playing them. Because we've seen over large parts, if he makes them defensive, it doesn't always work with a 3-4-3. Some of the things with a false 9 doesn't work, probably because of the personnel. You think how it works at Man City, it's players like Kevin De Bruyne or Bernardo Silva. It's not Lacazette or Aubameyang who are outright 9s. So although some of it hasn't worked, some of it probably has, and I think we'll see from Arteta next season is something that does work if he gets the time to do it and is given the resources to bring them in. Otherwise, who knows? And that's Arsenal.